wanashamwari akandida ndisingazivi akandifuwa nerudo akandisunga kwari moyo wangu wasungwa nefundo rora kasimba Jesu ndiri wako ini uri wangu narini ndawana shamwari yo shamwari yakandifira handi upenyu bachete asi akazipira zendi nazo handi zangu ndaka muchengetera moyo simba upenyu zesende zake narini ndawana shamwari akapiwa masimba ese kunichengeta munzira ino yenda kudenga mbiri kupenya yokuti indisimbise ngandirindendisewenze pambe rinozorora ndawana shamwari ine mutsa idine rudo ndi mutungamiri kwaye ane zero nesimba kuna iye anondidandino wana masimba korufurunga kurire ndiriwe wenyunarini.
I'm going to address 3 questions. So one of the questions that I got that's related to mental health, there was a question on how to cope with a heartbreak. How to cope with a what? With a heartbreak. So many young people were actually explaining that they have a lot of challenges related to heartbreaks. How do I deal with a heartbreak as a young person? So I'm going to share a few nuggets from a mental health perspective to say when you're going through a heartbreak, how can you deal with it as a young person? Maybe to start off, one thing that I would want us to understand as young people is it's okay to have a heartbreak. It's okay to have a what? It's okay to have a heartbreak. We need to normalize heartbreaks. The moment we look at heartbreaks as a pandemic or heartbreaks as something that is entirely negative, we are also affecting the way that we feel about the heartbreaks. So sometimes some of the human experiences that we have, how we experience them is related to what we think of those experiences. So I need you to change the way that you think and feel about what? About heartbreaks. And when we're talking of heartbreak, what we are essentially saying is it's either a love relationship has been terminated or there is no reciprocity in a relationship. So when you're talking about relationships, but you are already heartbroken even in that relationship. So when love is not reciprocated, that is also a what? It can be heartbreaking, auntie. So how do you deal with a lack of reciprocity in a relationship, and how do you deal with a terminated relationship? One thing that I want you to know is that you don't need to ignore or to suppress your feelings. You don't need to ignore or suppress your what? Your feelings. I know there's a lot of stigma surrounding grieving a lost relationship. When all the people look at us and we are going through a heartbreak, they just say, shake it off and move on. But I want you to understand from a mental health perspective to say, your feelings matter, your feelings are valid. So don't ignore or suppress them. Actually, what you need to do is to identify how you are feeling. It's okay to say, you know what, I am hurt because of the breakup. Or I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling bitter, I'm feeling heartbroken. It's okay to identify that feeling and to acknowledge it. Then, if you are in the habit of ignoring it, to say, you know what, it doesn't matter, I'll move on fast like Wi-Fi. The challenge that you are going to get into is that of avoidance. So the moment you avoid it, you are going to remain stuck in it, and you are never going to process it, and it will even complicate your grieving process. So acknowledge, identify your feeling, acknowledge it, and process it. Are we together? The second thing that you can do is to make use of social and emotional support. I've realized that many young people who come for therapy, going through heartbreaks, when I ask them of their daily routines, most of them spend their time stuck in bed. Most of them spend their time drowning in tears, self-isolating, social withdrawal. That is actually going to make your situation worse. Where possible, reach out and seek for social and emotional support. You have friends, you have family that you can reach out to. Reach out to those people. This will help you to empty out what you are going through. The moment you are explaining to someone how you are feeling and what you have gone through, it's actually part of psychological emptying. And that will also help you to process the emotions that you are having, and also it will help to soothe the pain. Because when people provide support, that will actually take you a long way in soothing the pain that you are having. Then the third thing that you need to understand is you don't have to blame yourself. So when you lose a loved one, when you lose your boyfriend or your girlfriend, please don't blame yourself. What's making it more difficult for us to cope with heartbreaks is because we are blaming ourselves for the what? For the heartbreaks. What I want you to understand is that the end of a relationship does not necessarily translate that you have failed as a young person. Are we together? Kupera kwe-relationship hazvirevi kuti tiri kuti wavefeila muupenyu. Tiriteseka. Kupera kwe-relationship kazhinji, it's just about usually two things. Muchaona kuti kupera kwe-relationship in most cases, it could be a result of incompatibilities. Dzaita kuti munhu agoti, you know what, let's go our separate ways. Or sometimes it's a result of unmet needs within that relationship. So when someone's needs are not being met in the relationship, it doesn't mean you have what? You have failed. Or when you're not compatible with this person, it doesn't mean you're not a good person. You can be compatible with the other person. So how we process all of these things can make it either easier or more difficult for us to deal with the heartbreak. The fourth thing that you can do is to prioritize self-care. When some of you are heartbroken, you can't even bath, you can't even eat, you can't even sweep your room, you can't even go to work, you can't even do your studies. So what is important is to prioritize self-care. So you need to take care of yourself, from the little things to the bigger things. I know when you have a heartbreak, believe you me, I've also had a heartbreak. So I'm not talking from theory, I'm also talking from experiential knowledge. So when you are going through a heartbreak, instead of failing to function totally, it's important for you to do the things that you're supposed to do, even if you don't feel like it. So when you're heartbroken, you won't feel like bathing. You won't feel like eating. You won't feel like going to meet up with friends. But these are things that you need to be intentional about. Why do you have to be intentional about them? It's because if you don't get back to a normal routine, it's going to actually feed on the depressive feelings, and it will make your experience even worse. But if you indulge in self-care activities, from the basic to even self-pampering, leisure, hobbies, and things like that, you're going to promote the production of my happy hormones, my endorphins, and that dopamine, and chemicals like that, which are going to actually help to fight off the stress that you are going through. Then another tip that I will share with you is you need to create a routine. You have been dating this guy. Your daily routine was he comes, he picks you up, he goes and drops you at work. You work, they call you at tea time, you go for lunch, whatever. You had a certain routine that you had because of your relationship. So after the breakup, you need to create a new routine. If you don't create a new routine, you are going to feel lost, and you're going to have a structureless life. So the moment you feel like your life no longer is structure, it's going to feed on to the depressive feelings. So create a structure. Either get back to the old one, or you actually create a new one. How will this help? It will bring structure to your life. It will give you purpose. It will actually get you to become, restore the normalcy and stability to your life. And then it will be easier to move on past the relationship. Another thing is to adopt healthy coping mechanisms. So when we are talking about coping mechanisms from a psychological point of view, we have different classes of coping mechanisms that people adopt when they are stressed or depressed. The first class is what we call problem-focused coping. Then we have what we call emotion-focused coping. Then we have what we call maladaptive coping and religious coping. What I've noticed is, so when I'm talking of problem-focused coping, we are saying you are focusing on what the challenge is, and you are looking at practical ways of going around that challenge. And then on emotion-focused coping, these are measures that you take just to soothe the emotional discomfort you're going through. Then when I talk of dysfunctional or maladaptive coping mechanism, I'm talking about the healthy habits that we indulge in whenever we are feeling stressed or depressed. Then the religious ones, of course, can be quite many. But the challenge that you as young people make when you're going through heartbreaks is you use more of emotion-focused coping mechanism. So this is where you are binge eating, this is where you are oversleeping, this is where you are getting into drug and substance abuse, this is where you are doing social withdrawal and things like that. So emotion-focused coping mechanisms may make you feel like you are feeling better, but actually it makes everything worse. So let's avoid unhealthy coping mechanisms and find healthier ways to cope. Then you need also as a young person, lastly, to remember that you can actually live on. You can actually live on your own. And still life goes on. This may sound a bit harsh to someone who is heartbroken, but this is brutal reality. This is the objective truth. You can still live on and move on without this person. Why am I saying that? Before you met this person, you were living and you were doing just quite okay. So life can as well continue without this person. Are we together? So our experiences when it comes to mental health, they mostly hinge on how we think of things and how we interpret life. So the moment you interpret your life to say, I cannot live with this person. He was the air that I breathe. He was my pillar of strength. He was my alpha and omega. Definitely, how will you be able to live without the air that you breathe? You won't. So it's about how you think towards certain things. So it's important that that person meant a lot to you. But we are saying, even without them, life still what? Life still goes on. Grieve your loss. Learn from that relationship. Enjoy also being single, because there are blessings that come with singleness. And after enjoying the blessings of singleness, open yourself up to new possibilities. After all, that's not the end of the world. That's my answer to the question on how to cope with heartbreaks. Any follow-up question on that? On what I have said? Before I move on to my next question? Yes.
Yes, so I was saying, is there a difference between, there's like romantic relationship, like heartbreaks, and then there's friendship heartbreaks as well. So is there a difference? Do you have to treat a romantic relationship heartbreak the same way you would treat like a friendship heartbreak? Or are they the same or are they different, in your opinion?
Okay, so in the premarital phase, these heartbreaks are pretty much the same. Because most of these people that we are calling friends, if they are of the opposite sex, most times you find that it was actually a relationship in essence. It just wasn't a mere friendship. Maybe what was not there, maybe was the physical intimacy or sexual intimacy. But when it comes to emotional intimacy, it was as deep as a relationship. Have you realized that sometimes you can have a friend of the opposite sex that you are actually closer to emotionally than the person that you are calling your boyfriend or your girlfriend? So it can be a friendship in quotes, but if you lose that friend, not open the heartbreak, because of the emotional intimacy or the emotional closeness that was there. So the same tips can as well help. So whether it's a friend of the same sex or the opposite sex, you can still deal with it in pretty much the same way. Yes.
My question is, when do you know you've healed from this heartbreak? What are the signs that you have
How do
healed?
you know you have healed? Okay, how do you know you have healed? So one thing, as an add-on point to answering that question, young people do not be in the habit of moving fast like Wi-Fi. This is why you end up having a vicious cycle of dysfunctional relationships. Why? Because you are moving on fast like what? Like Wi-Fi. And you know what? Ndinoda kutomprove ndichiri kutopisa. Ndinoda kuti atozviona ndikutopisa hasiri boni yenyika, and then you are moving on to the next relationship. So the challenge that comes with it is that you're going to move on before you have healed, and you are going to bleed on people that didn't hurt you. So you'll be toxic in that relationship, and you're also going to keep on, scarring other innocent parties. So you need to take time. After a relationship breakup, take some time before you move on to the next relationship. So for you to assess that, have I healed or not, one of the easy telltale signs is to check for triggers. Okay? So after a romantic relationship breakup, there's generally definitely going to be triggers that will remind you of that person, that will remind you of the relationship and whatever. So when you're going through the heartbreak, whenever you are triggered, you're going to feel very emotional about it. You are going to have panic attacks. You are going to have crying spells. You are going to start daydreaming again and things like that. But if you get to a point where no matter how triggered you are, yes, you can remember this person and you can remember what happened, but without emotional pain, then you have healed. And believe you me, you can get to that point where you can actually remember, you know what? Picnic, and you know what? It was so sweet. It was so romantic. And you remember and you can laugh it off without it bringing emotional pain. That's when you realize that you have healed. But the moment you are still feeling triggered, the moment their name is raised and you are feeling like, then it means you haven't what? You haven't healed. Then also check your ability, how you are relating with people of the opposite sex. Also check your behaviors around the opposite sex people and around issues to do with the relationships. And see if you are still being triggered. If you are still being very much triggered, you haven't healed. But if you are now at a point where you are no longer triggered with emotional pain, then you are okay. Then also let's normalize getting help for us to heal. Are we together? Some of these things we cannot easily navigate through them alone. Let's normalize seeking help. Yes.
I've realized that men generally are logical. Women are emotional. Where do you strike the balance? Because sometimes you might tend to make your decisions based on emotions or feelings and end up again hurting yourself rather than being logical.
Okay.
Yeah. So where someone says that psychological, it defines the relationship between a man and a woman. One is a psycho and one is logical. But I don't know. Don't tell me who is logical and who is psycho. What I want is for us to strike the balance. Where do we draw the line? Because sometimes feelings are misleading. And I think Ellen White actually says that emotions and feelings are misleading.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. So what I would say to young people is when you're making a choice of a partner to date or a partner to marry, don't base it on feelings. Are we together? Don't base it on what? On feelings. Why? Because feelings are not constants. Feelings change. You may feel like butterflies today, and tomorrow you are feeling like you hate this person. So feelings are not a sure guide, and definitely they are going to mislead you. So in making a choice of a partner, use logical reasoning. That's why I talked about the feeling brain and the thinking brain. So what we need to engage when we are making these choices is to use logical reasoning. And the higher powers of the mind, you need to process things and think through them to even get to a point where you are saying, you know what? I really feel for this person or whatever else, but I'm not going to marry them because they are not compatible with me. So you need to actually, so you would rather marry someone where your mind is agreeing with marrying them more than your feelings are agreeing. Are we together? It's actually a safer thing than your feelings agreeing and your mind not what? Not agreeing. So we need to use the higher powers of the mind. Then where I was talking about feelings is the point where I'm saying for you to assess, have I healed emotionally? Because remember, a heartbreak, this is a psycho-emotional issue. Are we together? So when we are talking of emotional issues, when we are trying to dictate even emotional state, mental health state, what do we use? We use things like feelings. So we are not saying let the feelings guide you, but we are saying they can help you to assess whether you have healed or not. But while we are also assessing these things, wakunopinda mu relationship wahila, hausi kunopinda nema feelings. Kuti ndahila iri ma feelings angu ari kuti ndahila, saka chirega ndichimufa ondingodanana newandawana nekuti ma feelings angu ati. Tiri kuti ma feelings ako akudza kuti wahila, indeed waassessa kuti wahila. Now apply logical reasoning to get into the next relationship.
So I wanted to ask that how do you know the one that is not affected, right? How do I know that someone is still going through a breakup? And what should I do maybe to stay away from dating such a person who's still then suffering from a breakup? And another follow-up question to what you were saying is it not wise before you date someone to go through counseling before you even date them? Because people tend to carry a lot of issues from childhood, some from adulthood, traumas that they've experienced in their lives. So is it not safe before you even think of taking someone out for a coffee or doing all those things, to go for counseling?
All right, thank you. Thank you for the very intelligent questions. So my answer to question number 1 is to say, you cannot always tell. You cannot always tell whether someone is healed from their past relationship or not, especially from face value. Okay? So sometimes we cannot really scan someone from seeing them or having a conversation with them that they have not healed. But where possible, you can also try and do due diligence. How can you do due diligence? As you're getting to know this person, don't just date a person before you know them thoroughly. Are we together? Ellen White even talks about when you're considering a relationship or marriage, you need to have thorough knowledge of the object loved. You need to understand this person, this object of your love. So this habit of just saying, "Ndamona yellow banana, so I'm going to get into a relationship with them." That's when you're going to be getting into relationships with people who are bringing a lot of baggage into that relationship. So get to know this person. Where are they coming from? What is their past like? What are their previous relationships like? If you would assess those things using your logic and using your reasoning, sometimes you can even tell kuti munhu yada ndita painkiller. Nditori chi painkiller remunhu ari kutobuda murelationship yake yarwadziswa ndiri kuitwa painkiller or ndiri kuda kushandiswa kuprova point, kuprova X point. So you need to actually understand where this person is coming from so that you see kana usiri kushandiswa nekuitiswa in that relationship, and also so that you see kuti munhu uyu ari kukuda here for who you are, and do they have a future with you or they're just trying to move past. Then to the second question, I would say it's very important before you get into a relationship actually to go for counseling. So young people in this generation, I know your parents there, we have to do a whole lot of convincing for them to come for marriage therapy. But for you young people in this generation, let's normalize counseling. Let's normalize relationship counseling. And could even before, so recently I've heard, just last week, a young man who came to me, young Adventist guy, came to me and says, "Netsai, you know what, booked a session with me." We sat down and he says, "You know what, Netsai, ndakabva murelationship yakati, time yakati, right now I've been single, I've seen this young lady from church, zvakadai, I'm contemplating to get into a relationship with them. What do you think?" You know, then we had to sit down. I interrogated his life with him, his current status with him. I also tried exploring around this girl, data, and things like that to then offer him guidance. So it's also important things. So you may not always reach out to professional counselors, but there are also other people who are wise and who are godly that can give you guidance. It can be your elders, it can be your pastors, it can be, you know, people who can give you meaningful advice. So it's important to get counseling before getting into a relationship. And if you have issues, for example, childhood traumas, adverse childhood experiences, or issues that you have had in relationships or love affairs, before you get into the next relationship, even wava heartbreak, normalize seeking counseling before you just get into another relationship. Why? You are going to bleed on people that didn't hurt you, and you are also going to become the toxic person yourself. So normalize getting counseling. Okay. All right. Do we have any other questions? Thank you so much. Then the second question that I had was on daddy issues. Someone wrote and said, "How do I deal with a situation where my father treats my mother in a very bad way to the extent that he even attempted to kill her, you know, to run her over by his car and things like that? How do I deal with such daddy issues?" What I would want to say to the person who wrote the question is to say, "I'm really sorry about what you are going through. It's definitely something that's difficult and something that is painful to you as a child. But what I want you to understand is to say, when your parents are going through marital issues, I need you to be able to separate issues between your father being a bad father and your father being a bad husband." Are we together? Many a times we end up failing to separate these boundaries, to say how our parents treat each other. We may actually project them and end up rating who they are as parents based on their marital experiences. So there are some of our parents who have made wrong marital choices that we now understand because Dama youth. Our parents also sometimes, maybe they have a dysfunctional relationship as parents. These are issues between them as a spousal subsystem. But let those things not affect the way that you relate with your parent, semwana. Why am I saying that? Your mother is your mother, and definitely you are going to need them in this life. So the moment you affect your relationship based on how they are treating the other parent, you are going to actually end up losing both parents in certain situations, or you're going to align with one parent and lose the other. So where possible as children, let's try to maintain neutrality. My parents and focus on how they are relating to us as their children. Then in certain situations, for example, where there is danger to life, like the case that has been written, where there is danger to life, one of the things that we may need to look out for as children is to try and help secure the safety of the other parent. So there are things that we can look at and say, my mother is now in danger. The next thing, or things like that, we may need to advise them to find safety. Or we may actually, as children, have the duty to warn. Right? So you can even engage the other parent. Because you can engage them and talk to them about it. If the situation is not improving, we have the duty to warn even other people. It could be relatives. It could be other authorities and things like that, so that we guarantee and protect the life and the health of the parent in danger. That would be my answer to that. And the last question from my elder was to say, how do we tell if someone is going through mental health issues? One very easy to tell sign that will not, in most cases, fail to show you that someone is going through issues is paying attention to behavioral patterns. So if this is a person who is your friend, who is your sibling, that you have a relationship with, you know how they normally behave. If you see any significant deviations in terms of behavior, that should actually be a warning sign. So sometimes they may not say, but when you see significant changes in behavioral patterns, interrogate to find out what it's about. Probe, get closer, so that you understand and get to know what it's about. If they won't tell, find ways of getting them to get help, or looking for someone that they'll open up to, so that they get help. So thank you so much. I hope I have answered all questions. You can ask your question as the elder is coming.
Mine is not a question, it's more like an add-on. I feel like with the signs in regards to showing mental health or showing that someone is going through mental health, a lot of people who suffer mental health issues, they tend to be happy around their friends, or but when they're by themselves, that's when they fight the demons.
Yes.
So if you then pay attention to behavioral patterns, they won't change around you. Some of them, you have situations where you're like, oh, I was with them just yesterday. What do you mean he hung himself? You know, it's because now when he or she is by himself, now he's now dealing with his life, he's now assessing his life, or he's going through his own stuff by himself. So a lot of them, when they actually tend to find happiness when they're around people, but when they're by themselves now, that's when they fight whatever they're going through, and at times they can win, and then at times, some of them just end up going the other way.
Thank you so much for that contribution. You are very right, very true. So when I talked about looking out for behavioral issues, what we need to understand is we are not just looking at social behaviors in isolation. To just look at social behaviors and say, they are still social as they used to. Look at other behavioral patterns. It could be issues of functionality at school, functionality at work, functionality in the home. It could be issues to do with indulgence in hobbies. It could be issues to do with church attendance and all of these other issues. So we need to look at their whole life and check for behavioral issues. Then, of course, it's important to always reach out to our friends and to our family members, lest someone is going through the most. Thank you so much.
Rine